Are you a parent wondering if you're doing right by your kids?
A therapist seeking real-world applications for working with children and their families?
A teacher trying to navigate educating the whole child in today's world?
Then this is the podcast for you.
Hey guys, it's Brigid
And Jenna.
the teacher.
And the therapist.
Hello, listeners.
We're back. Episode 19, which if you listened 2 weeks ago, I said 16. It was actually 18. You always praise me for getting it right, and I messed up.
That's all right. We all
That's
make
fine.
mistakes. But 19.
19.
Wow.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm surprised we're still going. I'm glad we're still going. Every time someone says that they're still listening, I'm like, what?
I think we're just talking to ourselves.
Shout out. Although everyone has been like, oh, I've just listened. I've like
To a
jumped
few.
around.
Yeah.
They're like listening to the ones that pertain to them. And I think that's great.
That's what you should.
Like if you're a therapist, you don't necessily want to listen to the school ones. Or if you don't have kids, you don't necessarily want
Like
the activities. Right.
Or something.
Or like if you're a teacher, I feel like they all apply to you because that's just me as a teacher. But whatever. You listen to what works for you.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, because they are like, I had somebody over the weekend asking like what is like the dynamic of the podcast and whatnot. And the episodes are so different. Like, yeah, we have the activities ones, like kind of the lighter hearted ones. And then I was like, and then we have one on generational trauma.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
ACEs or whatever. So, but yeah. So what are we covering?
Okay.
For episode 19.
I know I say this a lot, but I am so pumped for this episode.
Are you? I think you are.
We are talking about schooling, schools, all the different types of schooling that are out there.
Yeah.
So I'm super pumped. There are so many types of schools.
I was just going to say, like, let's just start by like listing. Like when we say schools or schooling, like what do we even mean?
Okay. So there's so many different types. We've got your traditional public school.
Right.
Private school, parochial school. Different like specialized schools. Those would be like a Montessori school, a Waldorf school, a Forest school, things like that. And then we have online public schooling.
Right.
And
which is different than like homeschooling.
Right.
Like I think people just are like, oh, I'm homeschooled.
Oh, if
like,
you're at home, but no, yeah.
Right. I go to school at home, but that's not the case.
And then we've got charter schools, behavioral schools.
Yes.
Boarding schools.
Boarding schools. You could go live there.
Homeschooling.
Yeah.
And then unschooling.
Ooh, I'll be interested to kind of hear more about that one. I've heard of it, unschooling, but I'll be interested to learn more. There's a lot of different types out there.
A lot.
When you said like to do this episode, I'm like, yeah, there's like private and public and homeschooling, but like when they're listed out, there's a lot.
There's many different methods.
Yeah. I have to imagine there's like some pros and cons.
Oh, for sure.
So.
I think they all have some pros and cons.
Some cons, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think any of them is going to be all pro, and I don't think any of them are all con either.
And I think honestly, which is, we say this a lot, it's like what works for your family.
For sure.
And I even work with families or clients that not even all the siblings do the same thing. One is doing online school and one goes to public school, or one is homeschooled and, at different ages, or like whatever the needs of the child are.
Absolutely.
Which I think is, totally matters.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay, so let's start with public school.
Okay.
What is public school?
Well, obviously that's going to be our most common schooling option.
Yeah. Probably the biggest.
That's what most of us do. It's also what most of us have probably been through, or it's in your neighborhood, of it. It's going to be that traditional building public school.
Right.
You live in the neighborhood, you go to school in the neighborhood, you don't pay for it.
Right.
So, yes. So the pros for that are going to be, obviously, it's free.
It's free.
You're paying taxes already.
Right.
You might as well
you got to pay
school.
No matter what school you go to.
Exactly.
Or if you don't send kids to school, so you don't have kids.
It's local. You're always going to have, no matter where you live, you have a school.
Yeah. And they have to accept you.
Right.
Yeah.
Generally, it's going to be free transportation.
Okay. Buses or whatever.
Yeah. Obviously, sometimes there's stipulations based on your school district, but generally free transportation and low cost activities.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to pay for your sports or your clubs, but it's going to be typically lower cost. You can still get involved in those things. Oftentimes, there's many, many, many more extracurriculars, extra clubs,
or even classes. Like, I think of languages. You know, of there's people are like, oh, I took Chinese in high school.
Right.
That was not an option.
No. So yeah, those different options. And then they often have more trade schools that go along with them or college classes if that's the way you're headed. Just, tons of options.
Yeah.
And then they are going to accept all students.
Right.
Obviously, a few exceptions, but
mostly if you live in the district,
you get to go there. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
But of course, with that, I know those were very pros, but there are a few cons.
Yeah. Be really big.
It can be huge.
Really, really big.
I mean, some of these public schools are ginormous.
Yeah.
Over, 1,000 plus kids in the high school. Like, that's a lot. That's a big school. So it can be easy for students to get lost, to slip through the cracks, things like that.
Lost in the shuffle.
For sure. And then another big con is going to be the quality can really vary based on where you are. Your location is going to make a huge difference in this. And school districts, one area away could be night and day different.
Oh, yeah. You live on, like, the next street over from somebody or... Yeah, I know some of them, like, the local one here is, like, I feel like the district is drawn so weird of, like, what's included and what's not included. But it's also very large. So I think that... Also, kind of going along with the very large, it's very diverse.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking of specifically, like, my local one is, like, because the district is so big, there's, like, rural and there's city and there's, like, so a lot of, like, diverse students as well, which can be a pro.
It can be a pro, for sure.
Yeah. So
easier for children to find someone they fit in with when it's those big areas, but also easier for them to be kind of missed.
Right. Yeah.
So,
right. Okay. So the next one, private/parochial. This is what we did.
Private school kids all the way.
Yep. Uniforms every year. So schools that are generally not controlled or funded by federal funds, at least not a ton of them.
Right.
And then, but similar school model. Like we said, might be less of, like, the languages, less, like, elective classes.
Right.
Not as many clubs, but similar, like, academic.
Right. You're still getting on the bus, going to school in a school building with a teacher. Traditional schooling.
For that. Yeah. So pros, it can kind of fit your ideals or what you're looking for and not necessarily limited by neighborhood.
Right.
With that comes kind of transportation. So it may... Like, I could have bused to school. I didn't, but I think I had to transfer buses to get to high school.
Yeah.
And in grade school, I didn't have to. I did bring the bus home a couple of years. Your brother was on my bus 1 year.
Yeah, and that shows because we did not go to the same school.
No.
But a lot of the time, those private schools are lumped together in one bus route because those school districts are trying to provide busing to many schools.
Right.
Because the busing is going to come through your local school district.
Right. Like,
so
in
even
Kansas
though
City schools,
exactly
whatever. Yeah.
Even though we went to 2 different private schools, we live in the same school district. So the same school district is responsible for busing.
Right.
And so they kind of just lump you together, and your routes can get longer, or you can have to switch buses, etc.
Yeah, I got home at 5 p.m. one time.
Yeah, that's rough.
It was, They also forgot to drop me off, so that's another story. That's unrelated.
That's attic.
But so it could fit kind of your ideals. It may be affiliated with a church, may or may not, which could be a pro or a con depending on the family.
I think, that's definitely both.
It really depends on obviously your needs, what you want, like if you want that for your kids or not. You know, generally it's smaller. So I graduated with like 100-ish kids. And I mean, I know people, the whole school was like about 400, a little over 400 when I was in high school. And I have a coworker who graduated with over 400 kids.
Wow.
So it's generally smaller, which again, pros and cons. It might be easier to feel excluded because there's like cliques and whatnot. I didn't have this experience because I went to like grade school and a feeder school into the high school, but I could imagine coming into like not starting in K through 8 or not starting freshman year would be difficult because I mean, there were kids I went to kindergarten through 12th grade with.
Yeah.
And so they already know each other. They have like their cliques. So I could imagine that would be very difficult. So some more cons. they're not required to accept all students.
Right.
They're not like the public schools. Obviously, you're paying tuition.
Yeah.
So in addition to the taxes you pay for the busing and for your local school district, you're also paying tuition to attend those schools.
In Ohio and other states too, but in Ohio specifically, that is sort of changing.
Changing a little bit.
We have the Ed Choice Scholarship kind of make it that you can choose where your federal funding for your student is going.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is there still is a tuition that needs to be paid to that school.
Yeah.
Someone is paying it. So
yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about Ed Choice kind of expanded this year. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah. Next up, we're going to talk about like our specialized schools.
Okay.
So these are going to be schools that we kind of mentioned. It's going to be the Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, nature schools, Reggio schools. There are so many. Yes, it's just another learning style, another educational model. So each of these schools is going to use its own specific education model.
Right.
We're not going to dive into each one because we don't have time, but they're all a lot of them are like child-based, or like you can assume a nature school is going to take place mostly outside or things like that.
Sure.
They're generally not funded by federal funds, but they can be.
Okay.
Like we have a Montessori school in our neighborhood that's funded by the local school districts. And so that is coming from the school districts. That's a free public school, even though it's a Montessori school.
Right.
So yes, it can be, but typically those are going to be tuition schools and they're going to be highly expensive. So, but they have pros. Obviously, the pros are you can pick the school that has the methodology that you
want. If you want Montessori, then you find a Montessori school.
They're almost always smaller and almost always have a very strong sense of community.
Right.
Because those families have sought that school out for a reason. And so people are proud to be there. And it's a tight-knit group.
Yeah.
So
they tend to be very involved.
Yes.
I think.
And so then you're going to be, in theory, less likely to have the children feel left out because it's just they are going to be a cohesive group for the most part.
Yeah. That's the goal, I think. The ideal.
And like we said, each one is really individually focused on how they're educating, but they're all going to be child focused and they're all going to be developmentally minded. So those are just they're really different than a public school because they're
more like
decide how they're going to educate the child.
Yeah.
But they do come with some cons. They can be hard to find. I think in the whole northeast of Ohio, I can think of one Waldorf school.
Yeah.
Like there's
I can name 2 Montessori
There's
schools.
not a lot.
Yeah,
there's really not a lot.
Yeah.
The forest, I think there's like 2 forest schools that I know of around here, and they're both like 2 hours away.
Yeah, I was just saying maybe that's partially like not demographic, but like geographical. You know what I mean? Like we in Northeast Ohio.
And then, like I mentioned earlier, they tend to be more expensive than other private schools.
Now
there are private schools. Private schools are going to come with a range of tuition too. It could be $2,000. It could be $20,000.
Right.
Those specialized specific schools are always going to be on the upper end of that.
Yeah.
They're very expensive.
Yeah.
Also, they're not always accredited.
That's so interesting to me.
They're not always going to be state accredited. They're just, and private schools are the same. They might not
technically not.
Most of them are like your local private or parochial schools typically are going to be accredited.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily.
They don't have to be. I think that's the difference. Right. And so like they don't technically have to
There's not necessarily that oversight and following the state standard.
And they don't,
et cetera.
Right, exactly. So they don't necessarily have to follow, like I know this is like a minuscule like example, but when I was in grade school, it was a federal thing where they banned vending machines from schools. Like it was like I think it was Michelle Obama's like health initiative or whatever. But I went to a private parochial school, and so we still had vending machines because it wasn't like we didn't have to follow.
It doesn't apply to us.
Yeah, so we still had them.
Yes.
Which, I thought was kind of interesting. But, okay. And then there's online public schools, which, like we said, not the same as homeschooling.
Right.
It's public school at home.
Yeah, exactly.
To be distinct. But typically it's federally funded, and it takes place, it's just a public school that takes place virtually instead of in person. So, like, there's, like, K-12. I think you see the commercials and stuff for that, It's pros, tuition free also, just like public school, just as if you were going in person. And I know even like one of our local school districts has like a kind of an online option, which I think more are developing that way. Like after COVID and things, they kind of kept that option.
Yes. For sure.
If students learn better that way. So it might be better depending on the student. If
it
they
can
work
be a
better
great option.
outside of the classroom environment. I've had clients who have like lowered immune systems. And so they're like, even after COVID, they were like, I just get sick so much, then I'm missing school anyway.
Right.
So it's better for me to stay home.
Virtual works out for some people then.
Right. It can be accessed from anywhere, so you could travel. If you're like, we talked about traveling and holidays in the past couple of episodes, you can still, maybe extend your trip over the holidays, or you don't have to worry about like snow days.
Right.
Good or bad, maybe the kids would find that as a con. But I always enjoyed my snow days.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, and you could travel and still kind of, I also have clients that like they'd sleep in and then they'd get up and
then do their schooling.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily 8 to 3 or whatever.
Right. Your hours are flexible.
Yeah. And there can be a lot of resources.
For sure. Especially if it's like the K to 12.
Right.
K-12 schooling. Right. It's nationwide. So you've got specialists everywhere who can reach in and help out. Yeah,
absolutely. Some cons, obviously it's dependent on like technology and Wi-Fi. So yes, it could be accessed from anywhere, but you need internet.
Right.
And so if that goes out, or if you don't have that option at home, like yes, that's free, but you need internet access, which not everyone has. It's not always reliable. I know. I do telehealth, and that's not
right. Sometimes it's just not working.
I'm in the middle of a therapy session, right? So yeah, teaching over that could be very hard. It could be isolating for students. So some students might work better in that environment alone. Like I can't have distractions of a classroom, but
then they're missing out on their friendship,
social aspect. Yeah. And I know we said that there are a lot of resources and things like that, but I think it can be a little bit more lacking if you're for like more exceptional students. There might be more resources if you need more resources to like reach your reading on level and, grade level and things like that. But kind of on the flip side of that.
Yeah, like students who might have either special needs either way. Like they maybe need assistance or like ADA type accommodations, or maybe they're gifted students and need those more challenging gifted classes. And you're not going to find that in those schools typically.
Yeah. Another con, this is new to me, but some studies suggest the overall, like, quote unquote, success rate is lower than a traditional public school. So is that like graduation rate type of thing?
You know what I'm going to tell you? I don't know.
Okay. It just said success.
It's just like kind of the thing that they go by is like, well, they're not as successful.
Like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Grades are lower.
Yeah. I don't know if it means like test scores.
Right.
I assume it would mean like graduation or next level, either
if you're
college,
going to
high school, trade school, something to progress.
Even going into high school. Whatever it is that you're going.
It's just generally the study suggests they don't learn as much that way or as well that way. So another type of school that's an interesting one is going to be our charter schools. Charter schools are public schools that receive federal funding. However, they are not part of the local public school district. So you might have a public school in your neighborhood and you might live in the Brown School District.
Right.
But your charter school is not part of the Brown School District. They largely were started to try to close the achievement gap between white students and students of color. That was really their purpose.
When they started.
Like, yes, they were just trying to close that gap. And in some ways they have accomplished that. They're lessening it. It's not necessarily always successful.
Sure. Yeah.
So pros, though, it does have pros. It's going to be an option for smaller schooling.
Yeah.
For those students who are in those large districts and maybe your student is just not going to learn best that way.
And like 1,000
they're going to be smaller schools.
Sea of students. Yeah.
Oftentimes they're found in failing school districts. And so they may provide better instruction than your school district that is, quote unquote, a failing district.
Sure.
Tuition free. That's a big pro.
It's public.
That's going to count as it's a public school. It's tuition free. They are often funded or overseen by chartered, essentially.
That's why it's called chartered.
Yes.
Yeah.
By local or state entities rather than federal. And so it can specialize to the needs and the wants of those individual neighborhoods. And so it can be a STEM school. It can be an art school. It can be a college prep school. It can kind of be
whatever
your local area needs or wants.
Potentially. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So like in my local school district, they have quite a few of these. They have like the performing arts school and there's a STEM one. There's a college prep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's many different ones. And so it's just to help those students who need whatever it is. The smaller, each of these chartered schools is going to have like a mission, a goal that it is working on.
Yeah.
And so, it's just going to help the students achieve that. There are going to be cons, though. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, admission is going to be lottery.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
You're just going to put your name in the hat, and who knows if you'll get in.
Hopefully, I get in.
Yes. So that's a big con. You don't know if you can actually go to it or not because they're smaller.
Then, does it, like, stick? Like, once you're in, you're in?
I think so for most of them.
Think,
but
because what they're going to, like... You have to
lottery every year. No, I think once you're in, you're in. But if you were ever to leave, you would have to lottery back in.
For sure.
So it's... Yeah. There's going to be oftentimes less resources because it's smaller. And there's also going to be less extracurriculars, less sports, just less of those extra things.
Yeah, the cons of all the smaller schools. Yeah.
And then they're not held to the same standards as traditional public schools.
Okay.
So there's the potential that they would be underachieving, specifically in certain subject areas.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they're not federally
like
controlled,
overseen.
I was like, oversighted? That's not it. Not it. Yeah, there's not that federal oversight. And so there's not necessarily going to be those same standards.
Meeting those, or meeting those same, like, norms or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Like, you have to do this, the Common Core math or whatever.
Right. They don't have to follow those the same way that private schools do.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one's a behavioral school, which... is less, but this is, there are, like, fewer of them. It's schools that are really specialized to help with, like, unique behavioral or, like, mental health concerns.
Yes.
They can be residential schools, but they not necessarily. They could also be kind of like day schools. You just go.
Like your typical school.
Yeah, like for the school day and you come back. IEPs are really integral there, and 504s, like we've talked about in the past episode.
Yeah.
Because students who go there are going to require some sort of either like their education needs to be tailored and or they need accommodations in order to achieve the standards. Sometimes it's meant for short term, like, okay, you're going to come here and like do, for 12 weeks or whatever. And then you're going to go back to your like local public school or wherever you came from. And sometimes it can be long term and you can kind of go all the way K through 8, or you could go
as much as you need. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And like just that can be your school for your like
I think
career.
In theory, there's always meant to be a plan to get you back to those typical schools, but the plan might be, okay, in however many years we'll get you back versus the 12 weeks, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah. So pros, I mean, ideally, it's going to be specialized. It's going to have like usually more adults in the room.
Yes.
There's probably going to be paraprofessionals. There's hopefully, ideally, and usually they have more training in like behavioral health and like mental health services, usually smaller class sizes. So hopefully that helps too. And then so smaller class sizes with more adults.
Yes.
So some students might have like a one-on-one where they literally have their own like paraprofessional. Some it might just be that, there's like the main teacher and then a paraprofessional in the room that can kind of help. A lot of times behavioral schools utilize like breaks and things like that. Or if somebody is having a hard time, they might remove the rest of the kids. And so it's kind of integral to have like multiple adults so that like one can leave the room and one can stay and so forth. But cons, it can definitely be expensive. Sometimes, especially if we're doing the residential ones, sometimes kids travel. So it's also like it's a distance.
Getting there,
It can come with a lot of stigma, right? Like we said, there's that goal that you're going to go back, but then people are like, where you been?
Right.
And like, what is this? And then, I mean, that follows you. Then you're going to go to college. If you go to college or if you go to trade school and they're going to see like,
on your transcript.
Here I am. Yeah, at this behavioral school. And then, they're just not always like accredited or properly trained.
Right.
And they have various success rates for the behavioral part and academically.
Right. Well, and like we said, one of the pros should be those specialized support and staff members.
Right.
But a con could be that they're not actually.
Right. And that's a question I would ask if I was a parent, or, if I was ever going to refer. Like when I worked in Chicago, there were more, obviously it's a bigger city, so more behavioral schools, and I worked in inpatient hospital, so we would see that a lot. But a question that I would ask if I was ever going to refer as a therapist, or if I was a parent looking for a behavioral school, is like, what kind of training does your staff have? Likely they are restraint trained, which means they can put your child in a restraint. That should be something they're discussing with you, like, hey, this is what we use. But even asking, like, there's different ones. There's like CCM, there's, so like, asking that, like, what is, and hopefully they're always like least restrictive means, which means if we can seclude instead of restraint, we want to do that. If we can verbally de-escalate and instead of putting hands on, we want to do that first. And so, like, those are questions I would ask.
Absolutely. This is going to be, obviously, any school you enroll your child in, you're going to want to know.
Ask questions.
But this is going to be one that you really need to dive into.
Yeah.
You need to find out, trying your best to find, like, families who have been to the school.
I was going to say, like
children
not referrals, but like references.
We want to know the school inside and out before we put our child in here, because while it can be extraordinarily helpful for those students who need it, it can be horribly detrimental if it is not a positive school environment.
Historically, it's also been like they've been abusive and things like that. So like, that's where part of the stigma can come from. Not only like, okay, I required a behavioral school, but also like, it's kind of, I think it's like, oh my gosh, like you're sending your kid to a behavioral school.
Right. It's stigma for the parents too.
Not only have you failed as a parent, but also like, what is that boot camp? And like, because traditionally, right, or what you might see in movies, that is what what it is, but that's not what it should be. So making sure, that they are.
Yeah, that's definitely one you're going to have to do your research on for sure.
Yes, and finding like professionals who might, other teachers or doctors and stuff that might work with or collaborate with. And so trying to get those professional recommendations or families and things like that. Definitely.
Okay, this next one I'm so excited to talk about. Homeschooling is my school preference of choice. Homeschooling is schooling that is almost entirely led by the caregivers, and the caregivers are responsible for obtaining and implementing a curriculum.
I think that is something like a misconception. Like, I think a lot of times people think like you just don't have a plan to follow.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you're just doing whatever you want.
And that would be more of our unschooling type. So a homeschooling is going to be, like I said, typically the caregivers, they're also maybe tutors or something like that. But basically it's someone, if it's a tutor, it still needs to be obtained by your caregiver. Your caregiver, whoever the adult to the child is going to be the one who's doing it, all of that work to maintain
and teach.
However you're going to choose to educate. So it definitely has pros. You have more control over your child's education.
Flexible.
You are directly, like, what your child can do, and you can tailor to your own child's needs and abilities.
Like, again, on either end of that. Like, okay, I know that my child's really gifted. I can they can be maybe
accelerate them.
Right, exactly. They're above grade level.
Yes.
Or they do need, more specialized help.
For sure. And they are just going to be more, like, we try in traditional schooling to differentiate our instruction, but there's only so much you can do when you have 20 kids in a classroom.
Yeah.
When you have your own child and it's 1-on-1, 1-on-4, 1-on-7, however many kids you have,
probably a smaller ratio.
You can still tailor to your specific child. And it's going to be instruction that's fully based on them and where they are, rather than them having to sit through a class that's above them or vice versa.
Yes.
And then obviously very flexible.
Right. Time-wise.
Depending on your home state. In Ohio, it's extremely flexible. It's very, like...
Unlike the curriculum you can pick? Like, flexible in that way?
It's... Some states are going to be very regimented. It's like
here's the curriculum.
Not necessarily here's the curriculum, but like you have to do this amount of school days or this amount of school hours and these subjects, and we have to see this, and this, that you've done it. You have to do this, and this test to show that you've done it. Some states are like that are very regimented. You still have to kind of have that. Some are not. Ohio is one that is very much not. It's you send in your letter and you say, I'm homeschooling, and the school says, great, see you next year.
Thank you. Yeah. So, thanks for letting us know.
Or that's how it should be. So sometimes school districts get a little funky about homeschooling, but yes. So it can be very, very flexible. Cons are obviously the parent or the guardian is fully responsible to ensure that those learning standards are met.
Especially in the states where it's more flexible.
And obviously not all parents and caregivers are going to know what they need to be doing to meet those child's educational needs.
Yeah.
So that can be a con. It's a pro that you get to do it, but it can be a con if you're just not sure what you're doing. Yes.
Yeah.
Again, it can be isolating, similar to the online schooling.
You're home.
Right.
You're with your siblings. You're in a co-op. Yeah.
So you're just going to have to be more proactive. Like it's not necessarily just a con.
Yeah.
Because you can work around that.
Yeah.
But if you don't work around that, it can be very isolating.
You have to work.
Yeah. Whereas like if you're sending your kids to traditional school, you don't have to worry about socializing them. It's already happening.
Kids are there. Yeah.
It's another step those parents have to take.
Yeah.
Purchasing curriculums and purchasing supplies can be very expensive. When you're buying all of that for your own student, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And then again, the lack of government oversight. It can be a pro, absolutely.
Pro or con, yeah.
But it can also be a con because then we're not sure what these students are necessarily learning.
Are you learning or
pro or con?
If you graduate or
right, and it's all very based on
college.
On your parents saying, "Yep, you graduated. Here's your diploma."
Right,
but not necessarily. Depending on the state, we don't necessarily know what that means.
What standard did they meet? Or are they then going to go to high school and then not have learned
and not be ready, right?
Or college or whatever. Yeah.
So slightly different from our unschooling.
Yes.
Which again is going to take place at home.
Yes.
But it's going to be solely child directed.
Not curriculum based.
So we said before, like the parents are going to be doing all of this curriculum, all of this. In unschooling, they're not. In unschooling, it's going to be the child-led. The child's own ideas. There's not going to be curriculums, lesson plans. Pros, it's obviously solely based on the children's interest.
Child interest.
So that's going to go ahead and guarantee that they'll be interested.
There you go.
Like when you're sitting through school and you're like, I'm so bored of learning about the Mayan Empire. I don't care. Whereas if you're unschooling, they can learn. If you're into airplanes, you can learn all your subjects can be only airplanes.
Yeah.
And then flexible. Extraordinarily flexible. Nothing could be more flexible than unschooling. You could do it from 3 to 5 a.m. if you want. Like,
yeah, sure. Middle of the night. Whatever hours.
Do whatever you want to do. And that can be really great for some family dynamics. If you're traveling a lot, if you have multiple kids who are at multiple different levels,
ages.
They can, A lot of people would consider this just like natural life skills, life learning, how to human type of unschool. It's unschooling because it's not focused on schooling curriculum,
really,
because there are many things to learn in life
that
are not 2 + 2, right? So that can be a big pro. There can also be cons because it's obviously not going to be aligned to any standard.
There's no standard.
We have no guarantee of what these students are learning,
right?
So that is definitely going to be a con in general as a society because we don't know.
What did you learn?
Right. We don't know that everyone's really educating their children.
Did you learn? Yeah.
And we need these children to be educated to some extent because they are the future of the society.
Yeah.
Right. So
just in life.
Yeah. So then also you may have troubles when you're switching to higher ed. If you're switching to high school.
Going to high school, to college, whatever.
And you're not used to the structure and the standards, that can be a big shift. And it can be hard to adjust. And then obviously, again, lack of government oversight.
Yeah.
We might say this is a pro. We might say this is a con.
I wonder too, is unschooling less or not really of an option in the states that have more strict or regimented homeschool?
Right.
Because you have to meet standards.
You really couldn't
in those states, right?
do it in certain states.
Right.
It's not going to be
you have to meet certain
You're
standards.
You're going to have to
take tests. And, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Because it's a legal requirement. Children have to be in school of some type.
Something, yeah.
So, yeah, in Ohio, it's very easy to unschool because we're not having to submit those things and say we're doing XYZ. Whereas in other states, I think my relatives homeschooled in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And it was much more structured. They had to like submit their portfolios and do their testing and show we have done however many 100 hours of schooling and this is the teacher who signed off on it, etc. So it's in that case, you really can't be unschooling. You have to be following something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that's a lot of different ways to educate a child.
It is.
And I mean, you gave us a sneak peek because you said, this is my preferred type of schooling. But do you have, as a teacher, like, do you have a preference or do you see like, yeah, this is like a better, quote unquote, a better education or?
Yeah. So homeschooling is my personal like for my home and my family preference of schooling. But in general, no, I really don't think that any of these types of schooling is going to be.
It's so individual.
Yes.
It's like what's going to work best. Do you want a religious component? Do you want a smaller class size? Do you want more diversity and like more diverse like academics? And
sometimes you're going to need like the individualization that can come from homeschooling. Sometimes you're going to need the resources of a public school.
Right.
Like some families are like, it's so important to me that my child has whatever religious education, a Jewish school or whatnot. You want to align their education with your beliefs or your morals, or not necessarily morals, but like ideals. Maybe you want a Waldorf school because you want your child to have those well-rounded skills and learn things that you don't typically learn in a traditional school.
Yeah.
Honestly, the best school is going to be the one that your child's needs are being met at and that they're learning and growing. That's the best one.
Right. It is so individual, not like a one size fits all for kids ever in general in any category, let alone school.
Right.
You know? And I mean, obviously some kids like transfer, they move to different public schools or they go to private school and then public school and so you move around a little bit.
For sure. I have some cousins they did so many types of schooling. They did homeschooling, public schooling, online schooling, Waldorf schooling. Like I think they tried everything.
They did like
they bounced around so much. And they just trying to find like what do we like best. They did parochial schools and all types of stuff. I think they both ended up back homeschooling at the end. That was kind of their preference. But it's just going to be what works for your child. Yes.
Interesting.
And to me, I think that's great because then you're truly letting the child like, I'm learning best in this environment. And they've both gone on to be very successful young adults. So it seems like it worked.
Got educated. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Do you have anything else to add?
No, just be sure to find us on Instagram at Teacher and Therapist Pod.
Yeah.
Let us know what type of schooling options you like.
For sure. You can also email us, teacherandtherapistpod@gmail.com. You can let Brigid know all the things that she was wrong about.
So true.
In this episode, because really all I know is, well, I don't even know the behavioral schools. I've just worked more in tandem with them. I went to parochial school. Yeah. That's about it.
Know that one pretty well.
So I didn't go to public school until graduate school.
Wow.
Preschool through college, undergrad. Isn't that crazy?
I went to...
You never went to public school.
Never went to public school. I went to 1 year of Methodist school. And
I didn't know that.
Like however many 20 years of Catholic schooling. It's a lot.
I did not know that. You went to Methodist school.
Yeah. Well,
wait, yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
So did I.
Your aunt literally taught there.
I went there for 3 years.
Oh, man.
So silly.
Yes. Speaking of complaints, I have to give a shout out to my brother who, after our sports episode, he's high school football coach.
Okay.
And I said that I wouldn't want my children to play football because traumatic brain injuries.
Correct.
And I was like, oh, heck no. And he was displeased that I said that because, as it turns out, there's much more safety standards that I knew about. They're like the helmets, I guess, go through like all types of rigorous testing and like have to be replaced like every 2 years or even less. And they're allowed like one hit and then they have to like change them out or whatever. So I guess there's much more safety concern than I realized.
They've gotten stricter on that because of head injuries and things. But
I mean, it's still a full contact sport though, so that doesn't mean I want my kids to play.
There are more concussions in soccer from what I've heard.
So there you go.
You don't wear helmets and you do headshots and whatnot.
Yes.
Or running in.
Well, I think you're not allowed anymore. That's like a big rule in soccer. You're not allowed to head the ball anymore.
Interesting.
At least I think. I don't know. I don't play soccer.
There's also like that is contact because sometimes you run into each other like, accidentally.
And you're not wearing the full pads. You're not wearing pads like you are those football pants.
Right.
Oh, man.
Wait, I have a question. Did your brother listen to the episode, or you said like, oh, and then I talked about this?
I don't even know. Well, I just know we've talked about it multiple times.
I'm just so impressed if he listened to it.
He might have. I think I told him about it, and then he listened to it. And then he was
okay.
like, by the way, you're wrong. So
okay, well, if she's wrong about anything else,
feel free. I love being wrong. All right, y'all. Catch you on the flip side.
Peace out.